A sweet 6-year-old girl looks up at her mom and in a very serious voice tells her, "I wouldn't sleep in your bedroom if I were you." The mom has kind of grown used to her daughter saying freaky stuff to her, but still it comes as a shock. What is the girl seeing? What is behind her dark thoughts? To better understand this girl, you have to know that she doesn't even think her parents are her real parents. She once announced to her alleged imposter parents that her real mom and pop were dead. She said to them, "No big deal, you're just my second set, I'm okay with that." If that isn't disturbing enough, the girl sees what she calls skeleton men running around the house. They run through walls, they inhabit the room where her parents sleep. Sometimes dressed as soldiers, they walk through the living room while everyone is watching TV. This is a true story, well, allegedly, and the girl is now grown up and remembers nothing about accusing her parents of being fake. She can't recall ever seeing the skeleton man. She's forgotten all about a friend she used to have who lived in the spooky attic. That friend, Felicia, was of course a figment of the girl's imagination. But the question is, what was going on in that girl's head? As you'll see today, she's one of many children who say the creepiest stuff to their parents. In fact, some kids say they have past lives, and they make a very, very strong case for that being true. They remember entire villages where they've never been. They know their old houses, their old lovers, the clothes they used to wear. They know things they just shouldn't know. It's frankly unbelievable, but sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Other times, well, it's just fiction. Let's now have a look at some amazing cases of reincarnated kids. A child was born on April 10, 1998, in the state of Louisiana. He was named James Leninger, son of Bruce and Andrea. He was a healthy baby and a joy to his doting parents, but not so long after he learned how to talk, he announced something incredibly strange to his mom and pop. He told them that they were in fact not his parents. In 2000, the 2-year-old told his parents that he remembered being an Air Force pilot during the Second World War. Don't turn off yet, dear viewers, because you're about to hear that young James had a very convincing story. It's not the most convincing past life story you'll hear today, but it's up there with the best. Okay, so James might not have had those memories had his parents not taken him to a World War II exhibit. No sooner than he got there, he was absolutely fascinated by the planes he saw. He was so fascinated with planes that his parents took him to the exhibit a second time, but on seeing one plane in a hangar, James suddenly became quiet and looked quite sad. After that trip, he developed a habit of just repeating the words, "airplane crash on fire." He would then take his toy planes and smash them down on the kitchen table so hard that he destroyed the planes and made dents in the wood. Okay, thought his parents, our kid seems a bit traumatized by the war exhibit. Maybe we made a mistake taking him in the first place. Things got much worse. James then started waking up in the middle of the night just screaming and screaming. Sometimes he'd scream and then shout, "Airplane crash on fire." One time his mother and he dropped his father off at the airport, and James' reassuring words to his pop were, "Daddy, airplane crash on fire." James was starting to become a bit of a downer, but he had many more surprises in store. He started having hissy fits. He'd just writhe around screaming, kicking, punching, shouting, "Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out." After a few weeks of this, he started telling his parents that during the war he'd flown a fighter plane called a Corsair. 6 months short of his 3rd birthday, he told them he'd flown his plane off a boat called the Natoma. Unless he was secretly using Google, he just couldn't have known such a boat existed. His father went online and discovered that during the war there was such a boat. It was the USS Natoma Bay, an escort carrier that sailed in the Pacific Ocean. His parents, now truly spooked, asked James a number of times the name of the little man in the plane. For a while, James kept telling them that he was the little man, but after a while, he said the words Jack Larson. He told his parents that Jack Larson was on the plane with him when it was shot down. His father gave him a book called The Battle for Iwo Jima 1945, and James looked at all the pictures. When he saw a picture of the Mount Suribachi dormant volcano, James told his pop, "That's it, that's where my plane was shot down." The father turned to his son with an incredulous look on his face, and James reiterated, "My airplane got shot down there, Daddy." James's father didn't give his son up to the local mental health facility and instead looked for veterans of the war that had been on the USS Natoma. He found one, and guess what? He'd served with a guy named Jack Larson. The documentation in James's case provides evidence that he had a connection with a life from the past. On the face of it, the most obvious explanation for this connection is that he experienced a life as James Houston Jr. before having his current one. Are you convinced? You know that children have vivid imaginations, and you know that any child psychiatrist will tell you that it's not out of the ordinary for young children to be rather obsessed by death, Dead people? Ghosts? Still, reincarnated kids? That's not easy to believe. Now you need to hear this. In the 1950s, a British couple named Florence and John Pollock had 2 children, Joanna and Jacqueline. The kids had a happy childhood and were inseparable. One thing you need to know is that Jacqueline had a big scar on her forehead from an accident, and Joanna had a birthmark on the left side of her stomach. To cut a long story short, they were both killed when a car struck them on a country road. Joanna was 11 and her sister was 6. It was a big case at the time because it seemed that the female driver had driven right into them after swerving around on the road. That driver took her life shortly after the accident. Some years later, the couple had more children, twins they named Jillian and Jennifer. The father was convinced that these 2 new girls were Jacqueline and Joanna reincarnated, and he was more convinced when he saw that Jennifer seemed to have a funny mark on her forehead that looked like Jacqueline's scar. Her sister also had a birthmark where Joanna had had one. These 2 twins suddenly started to call their toys the same names that the deceased kids had called them. They knew of landmarks and places they had never been to. They knew what school the dead girls had attended. Things then got quite dark. The young twins started playing a game that involved one girl lying on the floor and the other girl pretending to attend to her bloodied head. Not long after that, whenever the pair walked near a car, they'd start screaming. The strange case came to the attention of a paranormal psychologist named Dr. Ian Stevenson. He studied the girls for many years, often following them around while they were growing up. His conclusion was they were reincarnations of their deceased sisters. He was very aware that the sisters' behavior could have been the result of the father thinking they were reincarnations, but after spending so much time with them, he concluded that this just wasn't possible. He believed the girls were so young they couldn't have possibly learned their crazy behavior. Something strange was afoot, said the doctor. Still not convinced? You will be by the time this episode is over. Can you imagine if your 3-year-old son suddenly started saying that he had been shot to death? That's what Kakshapa Ishwara told his parents in 1975. His parents didn't believe a word of it, but then his twin brother Indika started to remember a past life of his own. In fact, Indika remembered so much that his parents were able to find out who he was speaking of. They actually went to visit the dead kid's parents, and immediately Indika fell in love with them. Then there was the case of the reincarnated Burmese twins. They said they had been Japanese soldiers during the war. They spoke a language no one could understand, and they demanded to be taken back to Japan. They were girls, but they acted like boys while growing up. Past life memories are certainly fascinating, but only a portion of the population actually encounters them. That's not to say we can't learn from those who do remember their past life. While most of us do not have past life memories, these cases indicate that consciousness may very well live on after we die. We are not just physical beings trapped in a random universe for a few decades, and then we're gone. This is a hopeful message for people. There's so much we still don't know about past lives, but if there's one takeaway to glean from these cases, it's that consciousness may not die when we do. Thanks for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe with all notifications enabled for more In Wonder content.